the Private Sector ESG Forum. And the topic is really centered around our theme for this year, which speaks to two important topics. So it's a measure of two important concepts: energy security and decarbonization. So how do we bridge that gap and ensure that we have a sustainable future? Interesting topics. A lot of folks feel that there's no synergy between these two topics, but as we go along through the masterclass, and of course tomorrow at the main event, we'll see how these two things marry and how they work hand in glove. Essentially, we're going to have a couple of speakers running through different topics. Very brilliant speakers, thought leaders in their space, and they will be taking us through very essential topics. If we go to the next slide, we'll see the outline for today. And main ground rule I have is please pay attention, drop your phones, think about what you're hearing, how you can apply it to your career. You would have some questions. Please note them. The whole idea is as the topics are being discussed, you will drop questions in the comment section, and those of us who are facilitating today will take note and ensure that we get the speakers to answer as many questions as possible. Please mute your mics so that we don't have interference from from different people in the audience. So the speakers are not don't veer off topic. So just note your comments and put them in the comment section. So we'll go to the next slide, which would give us a glimpse of what we're going to be discussing today. So we have four interesting topics. The first one is around sustainable development goals. I'm sure we've heard about SDGs. So how does this impact on energy access, energy security, and decarbonization? We have someone who's going to delve into that, go into the details and weave everything together. You've also heard of disclosures, right? Companies have to disclose how they're performing around the 3 levels of ESG. We're going to talk about reporting. That will be the next session after we talk about the SDGs. We'll take a break and then delve into GHG emission accounting. What's GHG? You would find out for those who do not know. And how does it link to decarbonization pathways? We'll talk about some technology. We'll talk about practical cases of how you see that synergy between accounting and decarbonization and the benefits you can get from carbon markets. If you were here last year, I'm sure you'd know a lot about carbon markets. And then we'll now go into the space of energy security. We're blessed in Africa with abundant resources. How can we harness these resources we have and ensure we enable energy security? So that's the flow. And then, of course, we would now see the synergy between sustainability and development of our natural resources for energy security. So that's what we're going to go through today. It's going to be exciting. We have speakers who know their onions, so please have your pens and papers, get your questions ready, and feel free to keep putting them in the group, in the comments, so that we can track them. So without wasting too much time, we'll get into the first panel or first topic or first class. You can use them interchangeably, which would be handled by Mrs. Opeyemi Aledegbemi. She's a seasoned sustainability professional and an ESG leader with Stanbic IBTC, and her career spans over a decade. Imagine doing this continuously for 10 years. So she'll be talking about this topic in detail, and I'll hand over the microphone to Opeyemi. The floor is yours, Opeyemi.
Thank you very much, Otome, and good afternoon to all participants. It's an awesome privilege and opportunity to be part of the masterclass for this year's ESG Forum. I'll be speaking today on Sustainable Development Goals, that's the SDGs, within the context of energy security, which is the theme for this year's ESG Forum. Energy security and climate action go hand in hand. And we are going to be delving into how does Africa draw a blueprint or a framework for us to now enjoy more access to energy. Please, could you go to the next slide? This will be the content of today's discussion. We'll go into an introduction of what the SDGs are about. I don't want to assume that everyone in here understands what the SDGs are. We will now also look at the triple nexus of SDGs, energy security, and climate action in the African context. And then we will now drill it down towards the Nigerian lens and look through the Nigerian lens on how to specifically identify challenges, the bridge, and also the actions to be taken within the Nigerian context to solve the energy problem. And lastly, we would look at the investors' mandates. What is the role of investors and financiers in terms of bridging the energy poverty gap in Africa? And we'll do final tips and a call to action. Next, please. So I would like to start with this statement. Africa contributes less than 4% of global emissions. This is an outshoot of a research. Several research also confirmed that Africa contributes less than 4% of global emissions. And when we speak of emissions, we speak of carbon emissions globally. Meanwhile, Africa also experiences 60% of energy poverty. And what we mean by this is that for the larger proportion of the African populace, about 1.3 billion people in Africa, we are using the energy supply that only serves 83 million people that is in Germany. So that's about 250 gigawatts is what is powering Africa on an annual basis. And that is only sufficient for 83 million people. Meanwhile, in Africa, we are over a billion and we are dependent on this same amount of energy. So that only speaks to us that Africa is highly energy deficient and lacks access to energy. Meanwhile, comparing the emissions in years past contributed by Africa as compared to the Western counterparts, we would see that Africa's contribution is really minimal. And there's a disproportionate impact of climate change on African countries. We would see that this is a massive imbalance and calls for equitable action around climate and also energy investments for the African continent. Next, please. So I'd like to also now look at the SDGs within this context of the energy poverty experience in Africa. The specific SDGs that are relating to this energy poverty are 4 highlighted SDGs. But first, what are really the SDGs? Sustainable Development Goals are a global call to action agreed by the member nations of the United Nations. And these call to action goals were established in the year 2015 as an offshoot of the Millennium Development Goals. And there are 17 SDGs speaking to various issues like poverty, energy, climate action, equality, and even justice. But for the purpose of our topic, we are focusing on SDG 7, which is affordable and clean energy, SDG 8, which is decent work and economic growth, SDG 9, which is industry innovation and infrastructure, and SDG 13, which is climate action. And during the course of the session, we would see how these 4 SDGs tie into establishing a clear roadmap for Africa's continent, for the African continent to actually develop capacity in terms of energy supplies. Next slide, please. So the African reality, what is our reality in Africa? There is a research that was released, or a paper that was released by the AFDB that states that lack of access to energy or electricity in this case in the African continent has led us to lose about 2 to 4% of our GDP on an annual basis. And what does this mean in terms of industrialization? We do not have access to energy to power our industries. Even in terms of job creation, the lack of power has also translated to some level of poverty in terms of lack of jobs, and that also has another impact in terms of insecurity as well. Next slide, please. We can now see that the lack of access to energy has had a ripple effect within our African context. And please, next slide. Thank you. And we tend to see that there are several challenges that come as an offshoot of such energy deficits. Our core challenges are, first, energy poverty within the context of these 4 SDGs that I have mentioned. Second, climate vulnerability. And third, lack of security or reliability of energy. I'd like to now talk about the energy poverty is lack of access for over 600 million people to energy within the African context. I think the slides are moving too fast. Please. Okay. Let's just move to slide 6. I'm still on slide 6. Thank you. So over 600 million Africans lack access to energy. This is directly impacted by the call to action for clean energy and reliable energy. Then vulnerability to climate change. The African continent tends to be very vulnerable to things like coastal flooding, desertification. Despite the fact that we have contributed the least as a continent to climate change, the African continent becomes vulnerable to this kind of climate shocks. Then security and reliability, that speaks to our over-reliance on the transmission or the national grid. There is really no decentralization, so to speak, in terms of energy supplies, and that has an impact on the economic system, also has an impact on hindering access to industrialization and even building our industries. Another angle is also the fact that African countries are usually highly dependent on fossil fuels because we are fossil-rich country, especially Nigeria, for example, is a very fossil-rich country. And because of our dependence on fossil fuels, we have not really been able to expand other energy sources to power our industries and also lead to greater development as a nation. Thank you for that. So now we can move to the next slide. I would like to give a case study of a country within Africa that is doing what we are speaking of before we now look at how to narrow it within the Nigerian space. I'm on slide 7 now. I'm on slide 7, please. Thank you. Thank you. Morocco's Balancing Act is basically leveraging the country's geographical location and the natural resources. The country's geographical location, Morocco, like we know, is located in the northern part of Africa. And though it's in an arid space, there are still opportunities for being in that location. One is access to sunlight, huge opportunity for solar powered plants there, and also wind powered plants. And Morocco basically has harnessed these opportunities to now turn around the table to see that these resources that are available can be used to actually produce energy for the country. Despite the fact that there is the lack of access to energy across African continent and even under development, basically, this season of this opportunity has helped Morocco to put itself on the map as a country that is very energy forward. I would say an example or a typical one is the example of the establishment of what they call the North Solar Power Plant. That is a 510 megawatts solar power plant that spans across 480 hectares, and it helps to generate annual energy that powers a large proportion of the country. There's also the carbon sequestration arm of it, where typically if there was a fossil fuel used to generate this much amount of energy, there would have been about almost 300,000 carbon emissions in terms of 300,000 ton per annum in terms of carbon emissions. But this is now this is a carbon emission that is now saved by going through the solar routes and not depending on fossil fuel. So we can take the example of what Morocco is doing. We can also, look at our unique resources as a country in Nigeria and also experiment on how and explore how we can leverage the uniqueness of our location, uniqueness of our resources to build the energy capacity that is required for us as a nation. So yes, we're looking at the SDG framework as a roadmap for us within Nigeria, and I will speak to the 4 highlighted SDGs. First is affordable and clean energy. How do we achieve this goal? Because the SDGs are slated for 2030. We are in 2025, so we have barely 5 years or less to achieve these goals. To achieve affordable and clean energy within the Nigerian context, we have identified the challenge of struggling national grid. We hear the national grid is down, national grid is down. Fine, there has been some improvements. We have seen that the generation companies and even the distribution companies have now been privatized and decentralized, but we still have reliance on the transmission of national grid, which is where all the energy that has been generated by various Genco plants is, put together into and then now transmitted through the transmission line to the various discos. However, we should explore and embrace the decentralized way of generating energy in this country, especially focusing on renewables. So we say mini grids, solar plants. we say things like mini grid solars. We say things like having even this portable solar installments in different houses in various rural areas. We are seeing things like this coming up, but we need more and more of it. The action is to focus on off-grid solar powers for us to also experience less and less of the energy poverty. And even when we have, some grids, mini grids in some specific suburban areas that can power those specific areas without having to go through the transition line, that would help us to also generate an energy. Another example would also be for us to explore the industries and see how we can tap energy from some of these industries, but we'll look at this in SDG 9. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So we're speaking to another SDG, which is the decent work and economic growth. Decent work and economic growth, that's SDG 8. And we may wonder, how does this link with energy security and climate action? It's tied into each other because by the time we are able to create these solar mini grids, there will be need to power these plants, right? We would create jobs for youth that have the skills and the capability to run these plants. So Nigeria already has a challenge of unemployment. As last quarter, the unemployment rate in Nigeria was about 4.3%, and we are looking to reduce this on and on. So the earlier we embrace these other areas of job creation, it's going to be a good opportunity for us to reduce our unemployment rates and also inadvertently reduce the insecurity faced by various regions within the country. We also see that during the course of establishing these mini grid plants or renewable energy solutions, we can also develop skills of these people that would run the solutions. So it's not only by establishing the plants and getting expatriates to come in, but we need to do some trainings, create training schools. I know of some of various process plants in Nigeria that have training schools. They recruit local talent, brush them up, give them the capacity to run these plants. And it's very doable for us even in this renewable energy sector. And it will help us to build long-term economic stability and would not be dependent on foreign skills and capacity. Next slide, please. Then thirdly is the SDG 9, which is on industry, innovation, and infrastructure. I mentioned earlier about the challenge of power deficit. So the power deficit does not only affect our homes or our businesses. It also affects the industries. They cannot rely on national power. They have to generate their own power. And this also leads us to an opportunity in that line, because when we see that an industry is producing power, there are several examples of process plants also that produce even way more power than they need, but they cannot transmit this power into the national grid because of so many roadblocks along the way. So we need to open up these areas. We need to open up policies that would allow as much energy to be harnessed as possible for the Nigerian context. We need to bridge the gaps. We need to make sure that even while we are developing as a nation, increasing and improving our national industry capacity, and also even having domestic products, we should ensure that this process is done in a just way, is done in a clean way. So I would give an example of fertilizer production, for example. And typically, fertilizers are produced from natural gas and air. That's nitrogen in air. That's ammonia fertilizer. But there are technologies that can be explored where you wouldn't need to actually use fossil fuel or natural gas that causes carbon emissions and would even cause more impacts of climate change. But technologies of using things like green hydrogen is something that can be explored, or going ahead to use the carbon capture, utilization, and storage model, where the carbon emissions are now captured and restored into geological forms, where in later or future time it can also be reused. So these are things that we can do to ensure a sustainable development for us within Nigeria, and to help us to get large-scale development within our country. And lastly, climate action. This is something I am even passionate about. And for the Nigerian context, we see that we even experience double vulnerability. We had mentioned earlier that Africa contributes 4% to global climate emissions, and we are impacted negatively by energy poverty. But even for a Nigeria, for example, we historically do not emit so much, but we are the most vulnerable in terms of desertification, for example, in the north, and flooding. We have experienced a lot of coastal flooding in recent times in Lagos, and this is as a result of climate change. We have seen several disappearance of even islands in areas where typically people have that place as their heritage, but there's loss of cultural heritage, loss of livelihoods, loss of homes as a result of these floods. And Nigeria also happens to be an oil-dependent country. So it is really a call for us to redirect our capital from oil into renewable projects. And we are seeing more and more of this. We are seeing more and more private capital being put into that area, that sector of renewables. And we are also seeing that we have more private organizations coming up to say, okay, we do solar. We are trying to power you by solar. And this is something that should be more and more encouraged. We also see the use of clean fuels, for example, CNG trucks. They are not, they clean up basically. So they are not dependent on the usual diesel, but they run on CNG, which is a cleaner fuel than diesel would have been. For us in Nigeria, we cannot do that quick switch. We have to take it step by step. And that's what we mean by just transition, because we also still need to develop despite the fact that we are combating climate change. Next slide, please. Thank you. And without financing, really, we cannot achieve any of these things we have said. Without investments going into the right channels, we are really just doing much of talk and no action. And there's an imperative for all investors, next slide, to finance and invest in areas that have long-term impacts for economic stability. And these key areas are mini grids solutions for solar-powered plants, investment in green energy, and CCUS, carbon capture, utilization, and storage. This is something that is somehow nascent in Nigeria, but I like what the IFC and has been doing around this area. There has been some studies, some baseline studies, and there's even an atlas on CO2 storage in Nigeria. So industries that are looking to explore this kind of technology can pick up the atlas and use it to, develop in that line. Third area or third key area is in transmission infrastructure. We need to, make our transmission infrastructures more modern. That's why we have been having a lot of grid come down. We've had national grid is down. Is because we are using worn out infrastructure, and we should modernize it and also reduce the bottlenecks and decentralize the transmission structure within the country. Next slide, please. I would like to also talk about the fact that we do not necessarily need to put all of the risk on this private sector investors. There is a role for governments to play in terms of de-risking the investments for private sector players and investors. We speak of the banks, we speak of the venture capitalists, we speak of people that are actually ready to invest in these areas, but there are some risks involved. And if we have the ability or the opportunity for the government to help policies that will help encourage investment in these sectors, or even reduce the risk associated with investing in these sectors, that would really go a long way. And there are a set of instruments that can actually be used to help de-risk investment in the renewable sector and help us, secure energy and reduce climate change. For example, the allocation of pension funds to projects that are, infrastructure funds, basically like renewables, like, clean energy projects. This is a way to unlock a lot of capital that has been tied into pensions funds for us to use it for actual tangible infrastructure development projects within the country. I'll just touch on a few others. I'll speak on the sovereign investment fund. Nigeria has a national sovereign investment fund, and the idea is for the NSIA to co-invest with private sector players. So it's not just private sector players investing, but the NSIA also has a critical stake in power projects, in clean energy projects, and renewable energy projects, so that it gives a good signal for private sector players to also invest their funds in it and say that, okay, this is something worth exploring. Next slide, please. Because of our time. Okay, and another mechanism that can be explored is what the World Bank did in terms of gas supply. I know this has been done for gas, but we can also do this for renewables. It's called the World Bank PRG, that's partial risk guarantees for gas supplies. And what was really done is that they backed up any gas supply. So there are things like payment guarantees. So we should have payment guarantees for mini grid players, for mini grid plants too, so that they can be sure that despite the amount of energy that they provide for local communities or even the IPPs, they would have a level of guarantee for payments. And lastly, would like to speak on sovereign counter guarantees, and this is what the ICRC does already, and their role is to really ensure that all public and private partnerships have clear risk allocations, so there is really no ambiguity in terms of the role of what the government does or even what the private sector does. Next slide, please. So I'd like to, yes, thank you. So basically, I'd like you to take this away, that Africa does not have the luxury of choosing between development and climate. We actually have to do both at the same time, running concurrently, and our development must be fair and just, and our climate transition must also be fair and just. We do not need to mirror what the West has done. We have our unique challenges, we have our unique vulnerabilities, and our unique resources available to us. And the SDG has been able to give us a clear path into how to ensure that while we are planning, while we are developing, we are also doing it in a just manner, and we are transiting into a clean, developed continent. And we also have opportunity to explore and tap into the multi-trillion-dollar industry, which is the renewables energy sector. I'd like us to just go with this call to action and to just for us to think and ruminate about. Next slide, please. I've mentioned the various challenges, the bridges, the actions for us to take, and even how policies can take a place in this our just transition journey. What other strategies can we also adopt that has not been mentioned to reduce the African energy poverty and also help us secure a path to net zero that is, and also help us to develop in a just and fair manner? I'd like us to give us some comments on that in the chat box. Let's see how we can explore this just development and also ensure a sustainable development for us in the African continent. Thank you. I'll pause now
Thank you
for
so much.
questions if there are any.
Thank you so much, Bremi. You've done excellently well. And you can see from the audience, hands are waving at you, clapping at you at the very excellent presentation. I think key things that I personally took out of this are energy development is non-negotiable. Without energy, there's no economy, right? Second thing is that there are opportunities in the global markets if we have low carbon value chains, right? And then for Africa, our energy transition has to be just. It's not about, we're not saying, and there's some questions in the comment section that allude to this, or comments as well. We are not moving into moving out of fossil fuels. It's more of a distributed energy and diversified energy system, right? So we are marrying the two, right? But doing it in such a way that we can still achieve our decarbonization efforts, because like you said, climate change is real. We see flooding in different parts of Nigeria. Even though we're contributing 4% as a continent, the impact is still seen very clearly. And so, we need to take steps to marry energy security and also the need for decarbonization, to address climate change effects. One question that was asked, and I'd like to just quickly ask this question. We might be restricted to just one question for this session because of time. It's around risks in energy investments. So what do you think around, what are those major risks in energy investments? You're muted, Brahmi. Can you unmute?
Thank
Okay.
you. Yes, thank you. Okay, so basically, I would say one of the major risks associated with renewable energy investments is actually physical climate risks, to be honest. For example, you invest hugely in a solar farm, for example, and that place now gets flooded or impacted by physical climate risk, probably hurricane or something. That's a huge risk that can actually lead to loss of investments. And the idea is to also ensure that once these things are done, you have guarantees, you have some form of insurance as well for this kind of in case of this kind of eventualities, so that we do not actually lose in a double way by losing the investments and also still having catastrophic impacts of climate change. Another idea is to make sure that we do not invest in flood prone areas. So it's very important for us to consider ESG risk when investing, so that we do not invest in areas that can actually make us lose out on our investment. So it's very critical. Environmental and social risk impacts are very critical in making project related investments. And that's one thing I'd like us to take away from here.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Brahmi. Well said. I would encourage the audience to keep the questions coming. If we can't answer all the questions because of time constraint, they will be addressed in other forums. We have a series of programs that we're going to run next year, and we'll be addressing key topics. So please keep the comments coming. The session is recorded, but because of time, we have to move into the next session, which really speaks around This transparency we require, right, in sustainability, right? It's something that we hear all the time, but how do we capture it such that we can see the results? It's credible, it's transparent. We don't just want to use these buzzwords. We now see the importance of the SDGs and the practicality of the SDGs, but how do we report them? How do we make sure that they're disclosed properly? The next topic is going to address this as we speak to sustainability reporting for energy and climate resilience. And we have a great speaker again. In fact, we have a solid lineup. Sarah Jose Adelgo, who is a seasoned executive in this space, running a world-class company called Tertial Consulting Limited, and actively participating in the Nigerian space and also across other parts of Africa, helping organizations with ESG transformation and providing advisory for decarbonization efforts, and also supporting governments as well. She's currently running a 6,000 hectare Tree for Life restoration project, which is really speaking to nature-based solutions and, of course, with access to carbon market benefits. So I would hand over to Sarah to take on this next session. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Otome. And Okoyemi, that was a great session that you just had. Well done. Thank you, everyone. And now we're going to talk about reporting, sustainability reporting for energy and climate change. We've all heard the word greenwashing, greenwashing, greenwashing. But a lot of greenwashing is actually us not being able to report appropriately. And that's what this session is going to talk about. And I'll be going through it. I'll talk about the African energy paradox. I think Okoyemi spent a lot of time explaining that, so I'll just glance through the business case for reporting appropriately, making our disclosures appropriately, having the right kind of evidence to validate our disclosures, understanding the standards, because there are several standards that we're going to talk through. So we need to understand what these standards are, and then we transit into the sustainability pillars. We'll talk about it when we get there. And then your implementation roadmap, because we can start today. We don't need to wait for the stars to line up. We don't need to wait for the drums to roll. We can just start from where we are. And I tell you, as you start, you will find out that you are already doing so much, just that because you are not focused on it as ESG impact, you are not reporting it. We are all doing so much already. Kudos to the Nigerian business space. And through this presentation, we're going to equip you with the strategic tools to navigate sustainability reporting for energy and climate change. I know that this video will be shared with all of us, and we can just look at it and learn a bit more on what to do. And we can demonstrate how robust sustainability reporting is not a compliance burden. Rather, it is an opportunity. It is a critical enabler. Investments, capital is flowing to companies who are reporting their ESG footprint appropriately. In Africa, we have the African paradox. We're talking about powering development. Over 600 million Africans do not have access to reliable energy. And like Okoyemi said, you can just extrapolate that to see the impact in our industries, in our production, in our manufacturing, and in the quality of life that majority of of Africans live. 60%, that's 50% of Africans. But I know that this is much more than this. UN Sustainable Development Group gave us this figure. Where are the African voices telling us the quantum of poverty, energy poverty in Africa? We have to still rely on global figures. That tells you how, where the problem is. And then we are looking at actually how this has to do with us navigating decarbonization. There's a global transition to low carbon economy, but in an area where we are already talking of carbon poverty, you can imagine where that is. Please go back one slide. Yes, okay, thank you. You can move now. So now we need to look at the business case. Why do we need to, report appropriately? McKinsey tells us that 85% of investors consider ESG in making their investment decisions. So you want to have developmental funding, you want to have global funding, you want to have low interest funding to fund your business. You need to be able to make your ESG disclosures. It is actually key. We now need to look at, the regulatory imperative. The IFRS mandatory option is by 2028, but Nigeria has decided to take a roadmap where we're looking at public interest entities, companies that have public interest, companies that are quoted on the stock exchange, companies that do business with government, and companies that have a huge financial impact and portfolio. They must adopt by 2028. And then SMEs and the rest of us need to look at 2030. That is the Nigerian mandate. We must report using the IFRS standard, which the Nigerian government has adopted. Now you need to look at market access and reputation. ESG is a way for you to build trust with your stakeholders. It's a way for you to differentiate your brand, and it's a way for you to secure your license to operate in many climes. And now, especially in Nigeria, because we are going into a mandatory disclosures regime, a mandatory reporting regime using an adopted standard, the IFRS standard going forward. Move, please. Now, we need to understand what are these standards. We've been talking about the standards. Many frameworks have different areas, but there are, three main ones that a lot of people have adopted and we're using. And for us in Nigeria, the International Financial Reporting Standard, Standard 1 and Standard 2, has been adopted by the federal government of Nigeria. And the focus of the IFRS standard is investor focus. We are looking at the financial materiality of your business. How will external factors affect your company's financial performance, and how do you address those factors? How do you manage them? How do you assess your risk and all of that? That is what IFRS is looking at. TFCD has basically been, I don't want to say outlawed, because you can still use it if you want to use it, but by 2023, all of the pillars of the TFCD has now been adopted into the IFRS. So we now work on the IFRS standard 2. You are looking at the 4 pillars that were TFCD based initially. So TFCD is now incorporated into IFRS, and we can work going forward with that. And then we have the GRI standard, the Global Reporting Standard, which is stakeholder focused. How are your activities? How are your plans and your strategies impacting your people? We are not only talking about your community and the world, people in the world. We are talking about the people in your organization. How do you treat them? How do your policies, how do your activities, how does your strategy affect the people that are your stakeholders in your business? And we're going to look at reporting from the 4 IFRS sustainability pillars. We're going to talk about the governance, strategy, risk management, and your metrics and targets. And one thing I want to say that needs to come out about reporting is that for reporting to really make an impact, you must be able to validate your reports. And how do we validate your reports? Data, 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 data. So whatever you are doing, no matter, even before you start in building your strategy, you need to build ESG into your strategy. Look at these 4 pillars and say, how am I going to validate what I am doing right now, so that when I make my disclosures, people know that I am not just greenwashing, I am saying what I am doing, and I can show evidence that I have done it. What are the outcomes of your activities? What is the impact of your activities? A lot of time, company report activities. Yes, it's good to report on your activities, but what are the outcomes of those activities? It's good to say, okay, when we did this is what 50 people attended, whatever. But what is the impact of that activity? How did it change lives? How did it change the dial? How did it move the needle? Those are the things that will ensure that our reports are able to attract the kind of investment, attract the kind of global recognition that we need it to attract if we will move the ESG space forward in Africa, especially in Nigeria. The first pillar we're going to talk about is the governance pillar. And this pillar describes how an organization's governance structure oversees sustainability and climate-related risk and opportunities. How is your board structured? How is your organization structured? How, who is responsible for what? Because we can say we are doing ESG, but who is responsible for your sustainability goals? It must, and oversight, it must be clearly stated. We must know how a sustainability risk is, integrated into the governance and decision making of your organization, because ESG must move from becoming a CSRO project into becoming a governance activity. Your board must oversee your ESG risks for us to be able to address it the way it is appropriately. And those are the kind of things that we want to see going forward. And that's what the governance pillar is looking at. Next slide, please. We now look at strategy. How does your sustainability and climate risks and opportunities affect your business model as an organization, affect your strategy, affect your financial planning? Do you understand? The other day in Nigeria, suddenly we didn't have cash anywhere. People could not do anything. And this is a heavily based cash economy. How would such a thing affect your business? Is it a risk that some companies have seen, and how did they address it? Those are the kind of things that we want to see. How does the flooding in Lagos State affect your business? How does the certification in the north affect your business? Because from what we are learning now, Kenji Dam is dry. How does it affect our long-term plan for our electricity industry, energy industry? How does it affect it? We need to begin to look at that. How do we change our strategy based on the ESG risk that we identify and the impact that it has on our reality? And that is what strategy is talking about. We talk about scenario planning. You now need to plan your scenarios. If this happens, how do I address it? It makes you more nimble in addressing your ESG risk as they materialize. And then we need to go to our risk management. When you identify the risk, when you assess the risk, how do you manage it? What is your risk management framework? How do you mitigate this risk? And for the risk you cannot mitigate, do you accept those risks, or how do you avoid those risks? Those are things that you need to have thought through. You need to have prioritized the risk. Which ones are really material and will have a huge impact on your business? And then, how do you actually ensure that you monitor this risk, ensure that you are prepared for this risk? I ask people when I talk to organizations I'm working for, a lot of SMEs, you ask them, what is your business continuity plan? You have assessed your risk. If this risk actually materializes and comes to pass, what is your business continuity plan? How can you overcome this risk or these issues and ensure that your business does not die? You need to have a business continuity plan. And if you are able to actually do this very well, developing your business continuity plan becomes what my children call easy peasy, because you already now have an overview of what you want to achieve, how you mitigate the risk, how you avoid the risk, how you ensure that you harness the benefit within the risk while taking away the negatives. And then after you've put all that in place, how do you measure? How do you, what are your targets and how do you measure it? What are the metrics you are going to use to measure these targets? What are your qualitative and quantitative indicators? You need to be clear on those. And you need to actually manage the relevant sustainability and climate risk and opportunities within your business if your business must succeed. What are the targets you are looking at? For Nigeria today, we can say, okay, Nigeria has come out to say by 2030, we want all organizations, whether private or public, to actually report on their ESG risk using the IFRS standard. For your business, for your organization, you must be able to set your targets, because those targets are what will drive your budget implementation in terms of harnessing the value that is in the ESG risk and opportunities within your ecosystem. And then we now look at what are the metrics. Sorry, this is in the oil and gas sector. In your exploration is O&G. In your exploration and production industry, what's, how do you report on your ESG? If you look at it from the IFRS point of view, there are different things that they look at. I'm not going to go in depth into this because we don't have all of that time, but you look at your greenhouse gas emissions. How is it going to work? You need to look at your water management. You need to look at your air quality. You need to look at your emissions data. All of this is key if you are going to succeed, if you are going to report appropriately. So you need to actually have defined those metrics so that you can then use it. You need to define your targets, and then you can use it if you are going to make your reports very, very nimble, and it's going to be believable. You need to have the data to validate the disclosures that you are making. And then also in the extractive this thing, you need to look at security, human rights. Security is a big issue in Nigeria today. Anybody doing business in Nigeria needs to evaluate the security risk. Even if you are doing farming, to go to the farm in many areas of Nigeria today is a security risk. So you need to evaluate it. How does this risk affect my business? How does it affect my productivity? And even for nations, you now need to begin to look at it. How does it affect food security in Nigeria today? Based on the security we have, in the northern part of Nigeria, where a lot of our farming is coming from. So ESG is across all the pillars. So if you look at your social pillar, you look at the security, you look at human rights. You now need to look at your diversity and inclusiveness. You need to look at your workforce. You need to look at their health. You need to look at their safety. You need to look at the impact of your job on the communities where you operate. How am I doing my job appropriately? And that is the whole thinking behind the Nigerian Content Development Act. Because we now need to begin to look, how are our operations affecting the communities, the society in which we are working? And that is the social aspect of it. Then we move to the governance aspect. Here you need to look at your business ethics. How am I going to do business? What are the ethical guidelines that are based upon which I am going to make decisions as a business? It must be very, very clear. And we need to look at different areas of us doing that. What mandatory regulatory framework are we going to work within? For many companies, if you are going into a contract, you see it there. If anything happens, we are going to defer to the Nigerian Constitution or within the Nigerian legal framework. So those things need to be very clear. And then we need to look at what are the critical incidents and how do we manage them? If you are a company that does a lot of work, in the Niger Delta, you need to look at the risk management in that space. If you are a company that does a lot of work, you have a lot of trucks on the road, something more like Dangote refineries and Dangote oil and gas, you need to begin to look at what are the risks that I manage within this space and how do I mitigate them? And what policies do I need to put in place that will guide my workers in this space in such a way that I can reduce the risk in this place as low as reasonably practicable? Now, if I was in the tobacco industry, within the RF standard, what will I be looking at? If you look at the governance pillar, you would, the social and governance pillar, you need to look at public health. That's why you see that many cigarette packs, when you pick it, it gives you a warning. So they've told you the impact it will have on you. So they've done their responsibility. It is now for you to make a decision. You now need to look at your marketing practices. Are your marketing practices aligned with global best standards? And how do you, how do you validate that you are actually working within the provisions of that sector? Next slide, please. So we now need to look at where are we currently on our roadmap. So we are saying that you can go from 0 You can start from where you are today. You don't need to wait for something to happen. You don't need to wait for the stars to line up. Based on where you are today, you can actually take action. And what we've done here is give it like a 12-month breakdown from your implementation roadmap from zero to reporting. And we say from today, the action you can take is to secure board and executive buy-in, establish a cross-functional ESG task force within your organization. Who owns sustainability in this organization? Assign the responsibilities and then formalize all of these things with a board resolution so that it becomes a way of business. It's something you can now begin to talk about, a transformation, a change management, a culture change, because we have now made this our way of working. If you go to phase 2, you now look at the assessment phase, month 4 to 6. Conduct a double materiality assessment. What is your gap analysis against the chosen framework? IFRS is the future in Nigeria. Measure where you are against the IFRS frameworks, identify the gaps, and then begin to say, okay, between now and this time, this is what we want to achieve. How do we want to achieve it? It makes your planning and strategizing all that much easier because you already know the gaps and you are planning on a way to close it. And you now begin to look, what are the key questions you ask here? What ESG topic most impact our business value? If I look within the ESG value chain, what is it there that most impacts my business value? Where does our business have the biggest impact on the planet and people? And then you begin to look at how you close in those areas. And then phase 3, months 7 to 9, you now need to establish your baseline. For example, scope 1 and 2, emissions and energy consumption, set initial targets, set measurable targets based on your baseline. Acknowledge the data gaps. We all know that in Nigeria, in Africa, we have a data gap. So let's not make that data gap the reason why we are not moving forward. The principle is progress, not perfection. So use estimates, use global numbers, start from where you are, set your baseline, and just begin to move forward. We cannot close the data gap today, but as we consistently move forward, we can do much more than we can even imagine. And then phase 4, in 10 to 12 months, if you start today, you are ready to start making your disclosures. Draft your first report based on the first 1 year of putting your data in place and telling your ESG story. Focus on telling your unique story, what you have done, the challenges you have. Be factual about it. Seek independent assurance for key data points and build credibility. What is important is validation. The data must speak, and you can collect that data, you can put it together. You don't need to wait for anyone. And today, I want to tell us that we can start where we are. This is your call to action. Within the next 30 days, convene an internal meeting to assign a champion for your sustainability reporting. Within the next 90 days, you can conduct a gap assessment. And within the next 12 months, you can publish your first sustainability report. And we are all here to support you in this process. We are all here to ensure that you get it right. What are the key takeaways I want you to take out from my presentation? It is a strategic imperative. Sustainability reporting is no longer a nice to have. It is central to risk management. It is central to capital access. Very key. And it is central to your license to operate, especially your social license to operate. You must embrace the 4 pillars. Use the 4 pillars of governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets as your guide for building your robust system. Data is your foundation. Start measuring now. Progress over perfection is key. Measure your progress every day. Nobody expects us to be perfect. We are not looking at perfect industries. We are looking at industries that know what their gaps are and making the investments and making the sacrifices today because they want to progress over time, because there is always a goal to meet. But the ultimate goal must be that everything we put out there must be accurate, verifiable data. Trust is your key currency in this space. The credibility of your entire report depends upon it. Trust is the currency if you will succeed in business. And through adequate ESG reporting, we must be able to do this. Dr. Emma talked about the ESG Horizon, which is the first Afrocentric reporting system that we're going to put in place, and is being championed by TISU Consulting. I will be talking to you more about it in future ESG forums. Thank you very much. And back to you, Otome.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I know, the passion is there, the knowledge is there, but you highlighted the key points that resonated with me around transparency. And starting now, right? Start now. There is always a gap, but once you understand where you are in your journey, then you can close the gap, right? We all have the potential to get to the global expectations, which is disclosing according to the global standards. And so you have support from folks in the room. I was going through the chat box and realized that as people were asking questions, there were others who were answering the questions. So you have a community, right, that can support you. Forget about where you are in terms of, your setup, in terms of the size of your organization. Start reporting, start putting those systems in place. Remember, sustainability helps you to maximize your resources now and also be fit for the future. So every organization, regardless of your size, needs to adopt sustainability and report according to the frameworks in place. Sarah talked about, the different frameworks, and, there's the alphabet soup, so many standards, but thank you, Sarah, for really putting some dimensions around it and helping us understand what framework is required for, the different aspects of the business, the stakeholder side of things, to also build attractiveness for your organization. The IFRS is extremely critical. So from the two panel sessions, because we're going to take a break now, we've seen that the SDGs are practical, right? And there's a lot of access to funding. But as Sarah has rightly painted the picture, you must report appropriately to be, to position yourself to access these funds, right? And it's no longer a nice to have, it's a must have, because we're going into the mandatory space, as we have in other jurisdictions. There are a few questions that are in the chat box. Like I said, some of them, or most of them, have been answered through the interactions. So well done, everyone. There's one question that I would like to take around. I think I saw something on science-based targets. And Sarah alluded to it. First of all, you have to set your baseline, right? You need to know where you are today. What's your scope 1, which is your direct emissions? What's your scope 2, which is your indirect emissions? So what you're importing. In the African space, we don't import heat. We only import electricity, and we cool our offices and all of that. So importing power from the grid, right? And our scope 3 is what's happening upstream and downstream, our own operations. There is the GHG protocol that helps you to determine your GHG emissions or account for your scope 1, 2, 3. Of course, focus is really around scope 1 and scope 2. And then on the back of that, you now build your decarbonization pathway, which is what the science-based targets speaks to, essentially. It links targets to the Paris Agreement, which is basically to reduce emissions to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial conditions, right? So there's that linkage between the GHG protocol and science-based targets. And it's important for companies to really adopt a scientific approach towards the decarbonization. So all that is being worked. And I hope that sort of addressed that question around science-based solutions, or targets rather. Let me look through to see if there are other questions. And Favor, please, if you have been able to collate any of the other questions, you can speak up. Because after this, we'll take a short break so that we can grab our cups of coffee and hydrate. Because that's part of being sustainable. You have to also take care of yourself, and ensure that you're not running aground. You're hydrated. So we'll take a short break. Looking through the questions. So again, please, if we miss any of your questions, don't be upset with us. Keep putting in those questions. We will eventually collate all those questions and respond to them, either in subsequent forums, or we could even send you a message. Please connect with everyone on the group. Like it's been said, we have a community here, and we can really help each other, support one another in this journey to remain sustainable, to address energy security and decarbonization. So I would say we take a short break. Please don't abandon the session. There's a lot more to come. We're now going into, we've talked about disclosures. We're now going into greenhouse gas emission accounting, right? What does that look like? What does that really mean? The next speaker is going to address that in detail. And so please take your break and come back. We'll be reconvening in another, I'll say 5 minutes. So please enjoy your break. Grab your coffees. I have mine. So join me. See you in 5 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, we want to officially welcome you to the event of the day, the ESG Forum 2024, theme, the carbon market, driving investment for a sustainable Africa.
I'm looking forward to conversations around how we can drive interest in the Nigerian carbon market.
I'm looking forward to learning from colleagues, from experts.
This year's forum is a significant milestone as it marks a pivotal moment in our collective efforts to chart a path towards sustainable development in Africa. Under the theme, The Carbon Market, Driving Investment for a Sustainable Africa, we gather with a shared vision to harness the potential of the carbon market as a transformative tool for driving investments that will shape a prosperous and resilient future for the continent.
Platforms like this that allow for discussions and conversations around the subject area are critical towards bringing attention to the sector.
One thing that we need to do very quickly is industrialize and develop Africa as a continent.
Agriculture in Africa hasn't been historically mechanized as should be. It's been largely subsistent.
One of the ways in which we can do that is by leveraging our resources. But unfortunately, those resources are a major contributor to these climate change issues that we're facing.
If I talk about the challenges and opportunity, these go hand in hand. Wherever there is a challenge, there is opportunity. First one is awareness.
Awareness is key. For you to play in the entire value chain, you need to understand it.
Because we understand that people development is a very, very strong pillar in helping our populace and our businesses to understand what contributions they need to be able to build from ESG.
If you don't understand certain hierarchies, you may struggle to gain attention of financiers. The way you will approach, solutions that you're looking to develop for urban-related issues is going to be different from the way you approach solutions you're looking at for rural-related decarbonization issues.
No single sector can do it alone. Everybody needs to come together. We need to play our part to ensuring that this planet exists for us and for the next generations to come.
As we debate about climate change and all of that, what is it that we're contributing or could better contribute to the reality we're in, and how do people really understand what's in it for them to have any kind of change in behavior?
Generally, businesses do not thrive where there is chaos.
Right.
And if we do not abate the impact of climate change, we will have a chaotic world.
I want to leave you with the African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
The forum has been very, very educative. I learned how the market is going to evolve.
How do you incorporate, especially the fact that you have a broken national grid?
One of the things that struck me the most, the mindset of sustainability and the awareness of sustainability has to be promoted.
I think one of the most important things I learned today was where one of the panelists spoke about how we do not have carbon problems, we have resilience problems.
There's been a lot of awareness being created. People are more informed and are now, open to the idea that they can individually play their own quota to making sure that when we talk about sustainability and we talk about ESG, that it actually becomes a reality. And we can actually actualize it from an individual perspective.
At Miva, we believe that the power to transform your future starts with one choice: choosing an education that empowers you. A place where
All right, welcome back, everyone. Hope we had a nice break and we have bottles of water, cups of tea, cups of coffee, depending on what you like. We're moving into the next session, which is really going into the whole accounting space, right? As part of your disclosures, as Sarah mentioned, you need that transparent carbon footprint to be clearly stated. And so that's where we go into the whole greenhouse gas emission accounting. And so we'll be talking about that. And we have a panelist, Mr. Solomon Iwejike, who is also a seasoned professional with decades of experience focused on climate change technology. He's done quite a lot of research in this space and come up with interesting technology, especially around clean cooking. He's the co-founder of CarbonX, an Internet of Things driven digital MRV platform. And he'll be talking a bit about that as we go along. So I'll yield the floor to Mr. Solomon, who would be taking us through this topic. So, Mr. Solomon, can you hear us? Are you there? Mr. Solomon, are you with us? Can you hear us? Okay, you might be having some network challenges. So this is the reason why we need energy security. Maybe he's run out of power at his location. So this actually speaks to the topic of today, which is around energy security and decarbonization. So we can't run away from this. It's staring us in the face. So what we might do to move things along is maybe we skip a session and maybe take it later. So Mr. or Dr. Jeremiah, are you available to speak?
Yes, please.
Okay, excellent. So I think we'll just take your session right away.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So just a brief introduction. So the fact remains that we have surplus hydrocarbon resources in Africa. I mean, we hear the numbers all the time. We are rich in these natural resources, which is an energy source. So if we're to develop our energy resources, we would bridge the gap. We would go out of energy poverty, and we'll be able to even export some of this energy to other continents. So how should we look at this? How do we see this natural resource, which, to be honest, has some carbon footprint? How do we marry developing this resource to breach our energy security and decarbonization, which we've talked about a lot today? So would have Dr. Jeremiah, who will speak to the topic, gas development, an enabler of energy security and decarbonization in Africa. So, Dr. Dari, the floor is yours.
Yeah.
Yeah, apologies, I didn't introduce Dr. Dari properly. So let me introduce you properly. I had introduced Solomon. So Dr. Dari is a registered engineer. That should be correct. With over 25 years experience in the oil and gas industry. So he knows what he's talking about when it comes to gas development. He has project experience that ranges from offshore projects, not just in Nigeria, but in other jurisdictions like Australia, Middle East, Southeast Asia, the North Sea. and of course, back home here in West Africa. And he's held a lot of senior positions, so he's seen the landscape in terms of project development. And so I'll hand over to you, Dr. Jeremiah, to do justice on this topic.
Okay. Thank you very much, Otome, and thank you for the invitation and all the organizers. So, as you say, my name is Dare Jeremiah, and I'll be talking about gas development, an enabler of energy security and decarbonization in Africa. Now, the question is, why are we talking about fossil fuel again, like gas development, when we are talking of renewable energy sustainability? However, please, next slide. I'll be exploring the natural gas as a transition fuel to the cleaner energy, so which will be balancing the economic growth, the energy assets, the impact on how it reduces the carbon intensity in Africa's energy mix. Next, please. So this is just the rundown of what I'll be talking about the next 20 minutes. We will first look at from known to unknown, like when we are talking of gas, we look at the overview of gas development, what is natural gas, how do we get it, what is the importance of it, and then, of course, we look at the economic and the environmental consideration of natural gas. Then we now look at it from the African's energy challenge and using Nigeria energy landscape, which most of the data that we presented there, we've already heard it from the previous speaker. Then we now look at the role of gas in Africa's energy mix, the energy security impact, the decarbonization pathway. Then we look at the investment and the policy enablers, what does the regulators. Of course, what are the challenges, the risk, and how do we manage the emissions? Since we are still talking about fossil here, and then of course, what are the strategic actions and outlook? Then of course, we look at the conclusion and the call for action. Next, please. So now, let's first look at the overview of gas development. Now, when you're talking of natural gas, what is natural gas? It's a fossil fuel that forms deep underground from the remains of an ancient plant and animals buried over millions of years. Why are we starting with overview of gas development? So that at least those that are not probably in the energy industry or maybe in the oil and gas, they are maybe in the banking, they will have an overview of how gas develop. Now, how do we develop gas? It's a series of activities which involve discovery, just like the way you say you discover oil, you extract it, they process it, transport it, and market natural gas from the underground reservoir to end user, and it supports industrial and domestic energy needs globally, which I will explain it better in the next slide. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Good. Now, when you look at this diagram, you will discover that exploration and drilling, which is the upstream sector, and then from there, they locate the gas reservoir, drill the well, and the well, when they drill the well, it can either be onshore or offshore. And of course, from there, it produces, which the gas flow to the surface, separated from oil and water, where they do the separation and probably separate some ethane, propane from it, and then it moved through downstream, because there's this upstream, it moved through midstream to downstream, which we are going to do the distribution. And part of the downstream, where we are now, where we are seated now, at least we are using power and of course, probably industry and eating, of course, in our home, and of course, transportation. So this is just an overview from the upstream activities where they explore, and then from the downstream to the downstream. And there are different kinds of projects using Nigeria as a landscape, as is a case study. We have onshore gas field, which is easier access, lower cost. And we have offshore gas field, which require subsea or probably platform technology. And of course, we have some unconventional gas, which include shale gas, tight gas, and coal seam gas. Please, next. So what are the benefits of natural gas? If we are talking about sustainability, we are moving towards renewable energy. Why are we now still talking about fossil? Because gas is like a transition to the new energy that we are talking about. So what are the benefits of natural gas? First, electricity generation in gas turbine and power plant. Eating and cooking, which we all know that in our homes and businesses. And thank God that if you look at in the 80s or maybe in the 90s, the cooking gas is more like the elites are the ones using it. But now the gas is more readily available for everybody at every stage, so which is becoming more common because it's cleaner. And then for industrial purposes, which such as fertilizer and chemical production, and of course for transportation of fuel, like the CNG, compressed CNG, natural gas, or liquefied natural gas, which we have in Bonny Island, that's the LNG plant. And now when you look at the gas development and economic growth, you cannot separate the two of them because you have is catalyzing the industrialization like fertilizer, power, and manufacturing. And it also expands the pipelines and LNG terminals, and also the distribution networks, which create job creation and local content opportunities. Now, when you look at the number of jobs that LNG created, the one in Bonny, you will know that exploring that side, we actually create more jobs. Even when you look at the downstream, there are some, when you go to the market, you see people selling gas or all this LPG gas and everything. So now let's now look at the economic and the environmental consideration. It boosts the economic benefit, it boosts energy security, support industrialization, and create jobs. So the more we explore more of gas, the more it creates jobs. Most IOCs and NOCs, that's National Oil Company and international oil company like Shell, national oil company like maybe First E&P, they are moving towards gas because it's the next thing, because it's a transition to the cleaner fuel. And when you compare it, please, still on the same slide, still on that slide. When you compare it and say, okay, what of the environmental impact compared to coal and oil, it has a lower CO2 emissions, but the maintained leaks can also be managed. That's why when we get to the risk, we are going to manage it. So it acts as a bridge fuel toward a low carbon future. So I will call gas development as a link to the future of sustainability of cleaner energy. Next, please. Now, what is the global relevance of gas? Gas development is vital for energy diversification, decarbonization, especially in our regions like Africa, Asia, and Middle East, supporting power generation. For example, there's a project in 2002 called Malampaya project in Indonesia. Because of that project from Shell that they discovered gas field, that Malampaya project actually became a big opportunity, in Philippines. It became a big chunk for power distribution in the whole of Philippines, powering almost 30 to 40% of the whole Philippines for almost 20 years. So this will tell you the relevance of gas development in power, supporting power generation, and of course, fertilizer production and LNG export. Now, this data has been given to us before. Over 600 million Africans lack access to electricity. Now, I think the first speaker or the second speaker said this data was actually given to us by the Western people. So definitely it may be more than that if you actually go deep and get the data on the field by ourselves. And so energy poverty remains a key barrier to economic growth. So growing populations and urbanization, it now increase energy demand. So the transition challenge now is balancing the development with decarbonization. Next slide. Now, looking at Nigerian energy landscape, largest gas reserve in Africa is Nigeria. Largest gas is Nigeria, which is like this almost taking over. Now, 70% of the power generation capacity is linked to gas. Now, you all know the electric power system that we have. So if you now explore gas the more, this is the road of making Nigeria to have a permanent, if not permanent, at least almost permanent power generation problem, solution to the problem. Now, because of the chronic underutilization due to infrastructure and pricing challenges, so decade of gas initiative to accelerate domestic utilization has become a big challenge. Next slide. So now, what is the role of gas in African energy mix? A natural gas is a transition fuel. Natural gas is sound as transition fuel toward low carbon economies and support base load power, industrialization, and domestic access. Now, the low carbon footprint compared to coal and oil. So that's why gas stands as a transition fuel to cleaner energy, to a low carbon economy of moving sustainability in a sustainability way. Please, next slide, please. So now let's look at the energy security impact. By the time we develop more of gas, it reduces the dependence on imported fuel, and it diversifies national energy sources. And of course, it strengthens the regional energy integration like West Africa Gas Pipeline, which is a project that is ongoing. Next, please. And as I said, because of the impact of the energy security, it enhances grid stability and flexibility. So if Nigeria as a case study can explore more of gas, which they are actually doing now, most of the IOCs and NOCs, they are having a lot of gas field left and right, and it's going to provide a base load and peaking power, which enable renewable scaling and energy diversification towards the future. Next, please. So what is the pathway to decarbonization? Number one, when we explore more of gas, it substitutes diesel and coal. It enables renewable energy integration using gas as backup. So in case when we are going towards the renewable energy, we use gas as backup. Then carbon capture and utilization in a gas project will actually enhance the industrialization of the nation. And so, as I said, gas, please, next, the previous slide, talking about the gas as a transition fuel, is a bridge between a high carbon fuel and renewable. It displaces diesel, fuel oil, and biomass, and it supports industrial growth with lower emissions, which complement renewables for grid reliability. And that takes us to when you look at the benefit of even in cooking. Next slide. The benefit of this in cooking and the social benefit. Now, over 900 million Africans rely on biomass for cooking. Now, LPG expansion reduces the deforestation and health risk. So that means if we begin to expand the LPG, the issue of they are going to the farm to carry the to take wood in order to cook, and because of the health risk that come with it, it reduces it, because that's the one of the advantage and the benefit of using gas to cook. And Nigeria's LPG penetration program targets 30 million households by 2030, which I believe can even do better. Now, social benefits include cleaner air and then women empowerment, because rather than staying and begin to cook with biomass, of course, they just use a gas, so which is another way of empowering our women, making them to understand more as we move towards cleaner energy. Next slide. So now let's look at the regional benchmark. I just chose 4 countries that is actually having some exciting projects on gas development. Like Mozambique, they have an energy export fueling development in that side of the world, which is, and then we have the Senegal and Mauritania project, which is a GTA project, is an offshore FLNG as a game changer. And Tanzania, there's also an LNG project, negotiating progress in the place. And Nigeria, presently we have the LNG train up to train 7, and now we are even advancing the domestic pipelines. So we have Shell Nigeria gas, putting some CNG stations around the nations, and of course, floating LNG is also on the way. Next, please. Now, what is the investment and financing pathways? So I just put 1 or 2 things there. Of course, the bankers will be able to tell us more, but if there's a private-public partnership and development finance institution-backed financing essential, is going to help a lot. And infrastructure and midstream investment need to be prioritized. For example, after the gas has been developed, extracted, and might be refined, now how do we transport it to even to the villages, which is like the midstream, moving it around? And then the carbon credits and green financing support for the low carbon gas, and then regional cooperation for cross-border gas trade, like the West African gas pipeline that's going on. And of course, the ESG aligned investment attract international partners because they know this is the whole world. So there's a lot of opportunity in that area. Now, looking at the policy and the regulatory guidelines, Nigeria's decade of gas policy anchors on reform, and the present government is working tirelessly to make sure that this area of the gas, CNG, the LPG, they are trying to put some reforms on the ground. And the time-bound gas utilization and emission target. Now, integration with renewable strategies, transparency and local content frameworks, which will actually really help and empower our youth, and clear fiscal regimes and infrastructure investment will do a lot. Next, please. So what are the challenges and risks? Because this is fossil fuel, it's a gas that we are trying to run away from. It has its own challenges. We all know that when you're talking of the oil and gas, is high capital and infrastructure cost. And due to the global decline in fossil fuel financing, for example, now when you look at Nigeria landscape, all the IOCs, they are moving towards deep water. They are selling off some of the, because they are changing their orientation towards cleaner energy. So there's a global decline in the fossil fuel financing and investment because everybody is moving towards cleaner energy. And then another challenge that which we cannot say we will not do away with is the methane leakage and the flaring concerns. Next slide. So that's how we now begin to find the way. How do we manage emissions? Because if we are going to use gas as a transition to as the transition energy to the new energy, we must learn and note how to manage our emissions, like control the methane, which is critical to maintain gas advantage. And then we must find the way to zero routine flaring by 2030 goal. Leak detection, carbon capture, and ESG reporting, just like what we have heard from the previous speaker. And then the adoption of global standards like OGDC, OGMP. Next, please. So what is the strategic action for a low carbon future? Since that's where we're going. is to implement gas to power and gas to industry strategies, promote flaring reduction and gas capture technologies, then develop a carbon credit and emission monitoring. Next slide, please. So, looking at the outlook, the gas in Africa's energy transition, we need to balance the development, the access, and climate goals. Gas as a bridge to renewable, not a competitor. So the moment we change the mindset that gas is not a competitor to renewables, that is a bridge from the fossil oil, bridge from the coal to renewable, and then toward the sustainable, inclusive energy system, then we know that, of course, we are going somewhere. Next slide, please. So as I close, so gas is central to Africa's pragmatic path to net zero, which means a secure, cleaner growth, but requires policy alignment, investment, and innovation. And thank God that Nigerian government and our oil and gas space in Nigeria, they're taking advantage of that. Most major IOCs and major NOCs now, they are moving towards gas field. A lot of investment, a lot of opportunities, a lot of financing is going on that side. And so now we have to now prioritize efficiency, and more importantly, technically, we need to maintain, control the methane and the leakage, and for, of course, equitable access. Next, please. So as I close with this capture is that we need to align investment with our SDG 7 goal and Paris goal, which is to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. And then Africa's gas can power both its people and its green future, which I will end with this: Africa can lead the whole world in responsible transition fuel to development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jeremiah. You've done excellently well in highlighting the benefits of gas. I think one key thing that resonates with me is what you said about the energy mix, right? We are not phasing out gas. Gas is an important part of the energy mix, and we're looking at it from a diversified energy perspective, right? When you have natural gas playing in the mix with renewables, it's clear that natural gas is a fossil fuel, but in terms of carbon intensity, is much lower than the likes of diesel or coal, to the tune of over 50%. And of course, you can further reduce the carbon emissions by bringing in technology, like you mentioned, carbon capture, sequestration. The beauty about it is this is not novel. Around the world, you have CCSU being deployed. The byproduct, which is CO2, is a useful product. Of course, I'm sure we know that our soft drinks are carbonated. So there's a way to ensure that we develop the hydrocarbons, in this case gas, and we do it at the lowest as possible carbon footprint. The technology is out there. We need to adopt it, and we need to develop these hydrocarbons to ensure we meet up with our energy needs in Africa, and also export to the rest of the world, like you said in your final thoughts. So thank you so much, Dr. Jeremiah. I think this topic is sort of helping us marry the concepts that we initially started off with, that some might have felt were not in sync. So speaking to energy security and decarbonization. So you've made it very clear, to all of us how these two things work hand in glove. We want to go back to the topic that was supposed to be before this, which is very important. It's about accounting for our emissions. And we've heard from Mrs. Sarah that we need to start now. We need to take those steps to achieving full disclosures of our carbon emissions. But how do we, first of all, estimate our current baseline? What are the ways to do this? And that's what this topic is going to speak to. That will be handled by Mr. Solomon. Mr. Solomon, are you with us now? Mr. Solomon, are you with us now? I know you had some challenges earlier on. Can the IT folks help to reach out to him? He might still be having challenges. I learned that he was struggling to
Thank you.
unmute.
Femi, please, if you're on the call, Ayomide, can you please unmute Solomon?
Okay, so while we wait for him, I would introduce him once again. I've done that earlier on. This is someone that is hands-on when it comes to technology. His company, CarbonX, are doing a lot of good things around developing clean cooking technology and also taking advantage of carbon markets. And I'm sure he will be speaking to that. But one key thing that we should keep in our minds is we need to wean ourselves off biomass, and that's where gas development comes into play. A byproduct of gas development is liquefied petroleum gas, which is cooking gas. And over 80% of people in Nigeria alone, you still use biomass. I know that's hard to conceptualize because you know maybe you are used to using your cooking gas, but trust me, verified numbers, over 80% of Nigerians are still using firewood and other high intensive energy sources to cook.
Hello, sir.
Okay, so we have Solomon on the call now. Excellent. So essentially, clean cooking is important, and we're going to go into a bit more around GHG emissions accounting now. So I'll hand over to Solomon. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Otome. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be a part of this year's edition of the Pan-African Private Sector ESG Forum Masterclass. My name is Solomon, and I am with CARBONIZATION. CARBONIZATION is a climate tech company that helps businesses across Africa to measure, track, and monetize their sustainability actions. We also are at the forefront of tackling the clean cooking crisis in Nigeria. I know when people hear crisis, their eyes will roll and they might think that I'm exaggerating the issue. But just this morning, something happened. I would consider some kind of positive alignment. My friend sent me a message of clean cook stoves that we are distributed to 250 women in Edo State. The message was on Instagram, and as you know, gold is always in the comment section. So I quickly scrolled down to the comment section, and I was a little bit perturbed. I was a little bit taken aback by the very sarcastic responses that are offered by those who had read the news. You know, everybody was angry about that. You know, they said they didn't want their mothers or relatives to be recipients of such clean cook stoves. And I said, okay, this is due to ignorance. You know, if we had to ask perhaps the typical African who the highest number of smokers are in Africa, the somewhat obvious response would be that it is men from ages 18 to 60. But the truth is that women and girls who use firewood to cook consume the equivalent of 20 packs of cigarettes on a daily basis. This means that these ladies smoke 400 sticks of cigarettes on a daily basis. I think the typical smoker, who is a man who do perhaps 2 packs, that's 40 sticks. You know, Africa is hot. You manage to do 40 sticks, then you calm down. But these ladies do 400 sticks of cigarettes. Do you know how much effort has been taken to dissuade people from smoking, even to the extent of posting these very hideous pictures on cigarette packs? But we have women exposed to dangerous gases from firewood. And I think that if 250 stoves are distributed, we should celebrate. It calls for great applause. Tens of millions of homes in Nigeria that still depend on biomass fuels, including firewood and charcoal, to survive. And that is where we are contributing our own quota to solving that issue. Smart food stove, which uses element of things in every country that are capable. Users of our food stoves will be linked to climate finance because they depend on it. In relation to what the last say, LPG should actually be designated a bridge fuel to renewable. Now, the reason is this. When there is the just of firewood in gas, it results in carbon emission reduction. Our technology, because we hold a patent on our IoT-enabled digital monitoring and report verification platform technology, our technology is capable of recording in a transparent manner and also in real time these carbon savings that occurs when the switch is made from firewood to gas. And we are also capable of monetizing carbon savings into carbon credits. The revenue from carbon credits is used to sustain the continued supply of LPG to the households that use our smart. We have also partnered with the microfinance bank to create a dedicated carbon credit card, which will be concluded with finance so that homes will be able to get LPG. So the carbon credit subsidizes the cost of the LPG, and it arrives at a cost that is cheaper than going to fetch either firewood or charcoal. Just recently, we concluded a baseline survey of about 4,790 households across 24 states in Nigeria. That study revealed that 98% of the households cannot afford our smart food without climate finance. It also confirmed that there's a huge market demand for our food because the women are tired, they're fed up going to fetch firewood, they're fed up with going to continued usage of charcoal, which is cumbersome and dirty, and gives them no room for having some dignity. So what we notice is that, or along the picture of this discussion, you will notice that there are very big disparities. There's the disparity of energy poverty, people relying on firewood, lack of finances to buy our stoves, and then on the other hand, there's climate finance, where we step in to provide the service, conduct proper carbon accounts, and monetize carbon savings so that households are able to utilize gas and spare themselves the health challenges. Also, deforestation also drastically. Moving on to this theme, which is reducing emission across Scope 1, 2, and 3, and more importantly, how doing this transacting energy security rather than compete. We all know, it's been established, the other speakers have been able to establish that Africa's energy landscape is a very chaotic one. We have the majority of businesses relying on generators rather than the national grid, because national grid supply power in a very effective manner. In Nigeria alone, up to 40% of the electricity generated sourced from private generated. In neighboring Ghana, we have very serious volatility of fuel prices, which is constant changes in business operation, cost of business operation. Eastern Africa has to depend on solar diesel hybrids to run their operation. So this landscape is a complex, challenging, and unique one. However, there is a lot, like I mentioned earlier, the challenge to find partners, investors, and even regulators demanding for credible carbon data from businesses. I would like to, at this juncture, point out that credible carbon data can be leveraged as a financial asset. I think this has been mentioned several times over this masterclass. So sustainability actions are no longer, there is now an incentive and leverage this data that they acquire as a financial asset. Can use it to acquire finances. So we are going to get into this matter, and I would like to begin by providing what does scope mean. And perhaps, I don't want to burden anyone, perhaps I may be preaching to the choir, but I still think that amongst the audience, there are people who are not knowledgeable about this subject. So if you stood by a pool, a stagnant pool of water, and you threw a pebble into that pool, ripple would emerge on the surface of that pool of water. The ripple, which is closest to the epicenter of the plunge of the pebble, can be defined as scope 1. The next set of ripple would be scope 2, and the one that is furthest away from the center of that plunge is scope 3. The second analogy would be that of an individual who resides in the city. For that individual, his neighborhood where he lives, the scope 2, his neighborhood or estate, scope 2, and then finally the city where he stays, 3. But we have to break it down to more practical scenarios. Scope 1 emissions are direct emissions from assets that are owned or controlled by a company. Now, this asset, the obvious example, and I will cite the case here, that of diesel generators, company vehicles, and also plant and machinery also use the assets that are owned and controlled by companies. If the emissions that are generated fall within the one. Moving on to scope 2 emissions. Scope 2 emissions are indirect emissions. Perhaps a company which operates in Lagos State does not require usage of generators, and the company's managers or hierarchy will think, we are absolved of this whole business. We're on the national grid, we don't do anything else. The company, however, has to account for emissions that are generated at the power plant that supplies the electricity. So scope 2 emissions are indirect emissions, which occur due to electricity purchase and use. So the electric plant, maybe it's powered by coal, maybe it's powered by gas, maybe it's powered by whatever, it yields emissions. Those emissions are accounted for by the company that uses. Moving on to scope 3 emissions. Scope 3 emissions are everything else apart from 1 and 2. They are emissions that occur along the spectrum of a company's value chain, both upstream and downstream. These emissions are sourced from suppliers, logistics, transportation of staff, including business flights, and then the use and disposal of products. So 3 emissions are the biggest emissions. They constitute up to 70% of all emissions in Africa. And I would like to provide an example for defining scope 3 emissions. Let's say there's a conflict producing. got to account for that are generated where it's raw material. So farm waste has first of all engage irrigation, fertilizer usage, and irrigation. These three activities yield emissions, which fall within Scope 3. The maize is not going to automatically appear in the processing plant. It's got to be hauled from the farm to processing plant. This obviously requires logistics. Logistics entails that trucks get involved. Trucks burn diesel. Diesel yields emissions. So the transportation segment of that value chain, logistics segment of that value chain, yields Scope 3 emissions. Finally, the maize land processing, the waste and disposal yield emissions, Scope 3 emissions. In the processing plant, it's converted into conflicts. From the processing plant, it hits the stores, emissions generated. From the stores, it arrives on our dining table. On our dining tables, perhaps you have a 3-year-old. You give your 3-year-old breakfast one morning, but your 3-year-old is
Hi, Solomon. So sorry. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Please, we're having a lot of issues hearing you. Your network is lagging. So do you want to maybe switch positions or try something? I don't know. But there's a lot of comments in the chat that we can't hear you. It's breaking, it's lagging.
Probably can just switch off the camera. Now we are not just
Can you hear me now?
Very clearly. Thank you so
You can
much.
hear me now.
Yes, I
Okay,
can
fine.
hear you.
So let me go back to defining Scope 3 emission. Okay, you would prefer I turn on my camera. Let me go on turn on my camera. Okay, fine. So Scope 3 emissions are emissions that occur outside the first category, outside the category of Scope 1 to Scope 2. It involves emissions that happen along the spectrum of a company's value chain. This includes emissions sourced from suppliers, logistics, staff transportation and business flights, and the use and disposal of products. Scope 3 emissions are the highest measure in Africa, constituting up to 70% of the total emission of emissions. I would like to cite an example that I earlier used, the conflict example. I'll go back to it. A complex producing plant has to account for emissions that are generated where it's got raw material source. The raw material of conflicts is maize. So the farmer who produces the maize has to engage in activities such as irrigation, land preparation, and fertilizer application. All these activities yield emissions, and these emissions fall within Scope 3. The maize will not teleport itself into the processing plant. It's got to be hauled from the farm's processing plant. During this process, the logistics entails using trucks. The trucks are powered by diesel, and diesel generates emissions. These emissions fall under Scope 3. At the processing plant, the maize is processed and waste is generated and also disposed of. Generation of waste and disposal yields emissions falling within Scope 3 emissions. Eventually, conflicts land in stores before it hits people's homes. The logistics along this pathway also yields emissions. When it hits your dining room, have a baby, you serve breakfast, and that baby will be thankful that morning. Baby might
Yeah. Sorry, Solomon. Apologies to interject again. Can you bring your mic closer to your mouth so that it's audible? Yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, this is much better. Thank you.
Okay, fine. It's raining heavily here, so that's affecting the network. Okay, fine. So the baby rejects the conflict and it turns to waste, which yields emissions too. So the emissions
in scope 3 are much harder and much higher to quantify. Now we know what the different scopes of emissions are. We'll proceed to determine how to measure them. Measurement of emissions is not done arbitrarily. You don't just wake up and pick up a piece of pen and paper and start measuring. In order to measure, you must align with globally recognized standards. Two of the most important standards are the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol provides the framework for what will be measured and also categorizing the emissions into the different scopes, whether it is scopes 1, 2, or 3. The IPCC provides a scientific basis for assigning values to these greenhouse gases. So with the IPCC, we have chemical formulae and also conversion factors that determine or provide estimates, for the different greenhouse gases generated from specific activities such as burning or even farming. So to measure scope 1 emissions, that is a very easy activity. What you do first is to record the amount of fuel, of diesel that is consumed. You also record the runtime of your generating sets. Then you multiply this by the IPCC emission factor of diesel. The IPCC emission factor of diesel is globally recognized as 2.68 kilograms of carbon dioxide released for every liter of diesel burned. So let's say a hotel in Abuja uses 10,000 liters of diesel every month. Its emissions, which fall under scope 1, would be 10,000 liters multiplied by 2.68 kilograms. It would yield 26.8 tons of carbon dioxide every month. The thing is that when companies or businesses find out what their carbon footprint is, which is their emissions, they are quite surprised. They don't imagine that they yield that amount of carbon into the atmosphere. They are also somewhat dismayed by the money spent on running generators, especially after discovering, because when you calculate your runtime, you discover lags and inefficiencies. Perhaps you find out that your generators are kept on for more than 2 hours every day when they could have been turned off. Perhaps power has been restored by the national grid and the person who is in charge does not make the switch when it ought to be done. So measuring emissions immediately shows you where you are burning money and releasing extra carbon emissions. For scope 2 emissions, measurement is also done in a similar manner. The amount of electricity purchased is documented and it is multiplied by the grid emission factor. Nigeria's grid emission factor is assigned the value of 0.59 kilogram of carbon dioxide for every kilowatt of electricity consumed. So a factory in Lagos that uses 10,000 kilowatt hours of electricity every month has a scope 2 emission of that 10,000 kilowatts times 0.59, which is 5.9 tons of carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere on a monthly basis. That's we've done the measurement for scope 1 and scope 2. They are easy to sort out. Measurement for scope 3 is much more complex because scope 3 involves partners, diverse partners along a value chain. What companies usually do is to determine along this value chain the section of its partners that are high emitters, such as its supplies and logistics and transportation sectors. So it will aggregate these partners and request that on individual terms, they sum up their own emissions, and this will fall into the category of scope 3 emissions. Now we know what scopes are and we also know how to measure them. But that is only half the story. That is half time. We're going to the second half. We have to make decisions with the data that we have. And the obvious decision to make is that there must be less dependence on diesel generators. That's the obvious decision to make, because once you reduce dependence on diesel generators, it means that your carbon footprint reduces, your emissions drop drastically. So one way to do that, especially for scope 1, is to replace generating sets with renewable energy, with clean energy. So a switch can be made from generators to solar systems. When that is done, obviously the emissions reduce because diesel is no longer burnt. For scope 2, a similar practice is done. Instead of relying on the national grid, you can also switch to solar systems. In addition to that, efficiency energy audits are also carried out in order that efficiency is maximized to the extent that appliances and equipment which consume power, you find that almost every 6 months or every year, newer models of appliances are produced. The older models tend to sap a lot more electricity. So when you conduct an energy audit, you compare what your energy usage is with what it would be if you bought new appliances, and then you make the switch. When you do that, your electricity consumption reduces, thereby also causing a subsequent reduction in your emissions, your emissions output. For reducing scope 3 emissions, the key is collaboration. Just like I said, for measuring, you have to aggregate different partners along the value chain of a company's business, of a business. You will do the same for reducing scope 3 emissions. And one way to do that, let me cite the example of that conflict plant once more, is that processing plants can be situated closer to their source of raw materials. So that factory could be situated close to a maize farm. When that is done, the segment of logistics of hauling the maize from the farm to the plant is eliminated. When it's eliminated, emissions are also expunged. Another way to do that is to perhaps, like our big brother Dangote has replaced most of his trucks that were using diesel to CNG power trucks. If you cannot physically relocate your plant closer to the raw materials, you could switch, you could decide, you could collaborate and make a switch in the vehicles that transport this raw produce. And the CNG trucks obviously do not use diesel, so their own emissions are lower. So that's one way to reduce emissions. By this time, I think a clear picture has emerged, and that making the switch to renewable actually confers resilience on companies. Why is this?
Sorry, we've lost you again, Solomon.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, fine. So the case is that when you make the switch to renewables, to clean energy, you have energy assurance. You are sure that the power generated by these systems are going to last you for a specific amount of time. Unlike when you're exposed to grid failures or when you are somewhat withheld by the cost of diesel, and which is determined by foreign exchange fluctuations in the price. So actually making the switch to renewable energy, which causes a drop in emissions, also strengthens energy security. It is that simple. At this juncture, I know that people will be thinking, are renewables actually cheap? Are they not also expensive? Where are we going to get the money to buy this clean energy? And even they will consider, they say, where are we going to get this credible carbon data? That's what people will ask. And it leads me to the next session, money and partnerships. Like I earlier mentioned, accurate emissions reduction, this sustainable action practiced by businesses attracts financing. That is given. In Africa today, we have development banks and green investors from the global north pumping in billions of dollars into decarbonization projects. I earlier mentioned Dangote's trucking that has switched from diesel to CNG. That's a decarbonization project. You find green investors pumping into money into such projects. So if your company can show that there is measured reductions, and in order to show this, it has to present credible carbon data. The emphasis is on credible, and it is credible because it is measured along or in alignment with the greenhouse gas protocols. Then your company will qualify for green loans. It will qualify for concessional funding, and it can even get revenue from carbon credits. In Nigeria today, we have organizations such as the African Development Bank, the Bank of Industry, and even the German Development Agency, funding pilot projects for companies that show demonstrable, measurable impact. Companies that show that they have made this switch and look, there was a drop in emissions. They are funded by these organizations. Nigeria as a country has an energy transition plan where they have set a target of net zero by 2060. And because of this, they also fund renewables. They also support renewables. So at this juncture, I think it is important for every business to begin to account for its emissions. This is where CarbonX comes in too. We can provide assistance with companies that need carbon accounting or energy audits. But first of all, I would advise that companies go back and they conduct, first of all, baseline surveys. Baseline surveys can be carried out manually. So you record, you collect your vouchers, you collect your electricity receipts, and you record your runtime, and you establish what the baseline is. Then obviously you have to digitize, and CarbonX can help you digitize by attaching IoT devices that will account for the consumption of your diesel and its runtime. In Nigeria, there's something I would like to share. In Nigeria, we spend billions, or we burn billions of liters of diesel, and it is untracked. Let me cite the case of hotels. Hotels spread across Nigeria due to the epileptic nature of power supply from the national grid have to depend on diesel. And billions of these liters of diesel are burned, releasing millions of tons of carbon dioxide. We would like to attach our IoT devices on all generators in these hotels so that we can account for the consumption of this diesel and also track the carbon dioxide released. And sometimes you find these hotel owners making the switch to more sustainable practices. They make the switch to solar without carrying out a prior energy assessment. If you know any such owner, please refer him to us. Before he makes that switch, he should first carry out an energy assessment, determine what his baselines are, get a credible carbon report, then he can go on and make the switch, and also carry out another energy assessment on the renewables which he has purchased. After he's done that, the data that will be produced will show that that switch deserves to be supported, perhaps in the form of carbon credit, perhaps in green loans, perhaps even in funding. So that is the service that we provide as CarbonX. There's a formula that every African business should adopt. It is the formula of measurement, verification, monetization, and reinvestment. It is called the sustainability loop. I will round up here by saying that measuring emissions should not be a burden for any business in Africa. It should be regarded as a strategic tool to empower your business, to make your business much more smarter, it will make it much more resilient, and it will make it globally competitive. We can use the rest of my time to field contributions and questions. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Solomon, and you did justice. I like what you said around, you talked a lot about clean cooking, LPG, which is a product from gas, and, we need to switch to cleaner, less carbon intensive sources of energy. You talked about decarbonization pathways, and they're essentially grouped into three categories. You avoid, you replace, so you fuel switch, which is what you spoke to, LPG, CNG from diesel and biomass, and then you remove and offset, which some other speakers have spoken to, adopting technology like CCSU, which is globally accepted and deployed by different operators. So excellent presentation. We are running out of time, so I think, the message is very clear. We've spent time together, marrying the two topics around energy security and decarbonization. It's clear that we must develop our resources. Our energy future depends on balancing this, adopting innovation and accountability. So measuring our carbon footprint and deploying sustainable technology as we grow in our energy landscape. These two topics are not opposing. They are actually working together, very closely together. They are not opposing goals, but two sides of the same coin. And we've talked about sustainability reporting. It's not just a compliance exercise, but it's a strategic tool to attract investment. We need capital to develop our energy space. And so once you demonstrate that you are doing this responsibly, adopting low carbon footprint technology, you would attract investment. That's what the global investor mindset is. So GHG accounting is critical, disclosures are critical, and it's not just taking numbers, randomly. There's a scientific approach. It has to be science-based decarbonization pathways, like we've discussed clearly. Gas development, we cannot overemphasize the importance. We've seen the government roll out initiatives like the Decade of Gas, like Dr. Jeremiah spoke to. Those are initiatives that are meant to develop the economy, because as you develop gas, the value chain needs to be developed to get it from source to sink. And that creates a lot of opportunity for young professionals, for all of us on this call. It creates entrepreneurial opportunities because the value chain has to work from upstream, midstream to downstream, like Dr. Jeremiah spoke to. Measurement is important. Again, I've said this, I don't want to sound like a broken record. We need to avoid greenwashing. It's not just saying, oh, I'm doing this laudable initiative, I'm reducing my footprint, I'm going to achieve 100% reduction in my carbon or achieve net zero. What are the steps you're taking? Are they credible, or are you just saying it? Remember, a lot of companies today have faced serious fines from greenwashing. You don't want to be in that space. So let's carry this shared commitment forward to, capture data, take action now, know where you are in your journey. It's never too late. Your organization is never too small. Start the journey now, figure out where you are and where you need to be. And there's a huge community here, like I said, that are doing this already. It's all about collaboration. And the ESG Forum is happy to support individuals who are interested. I see that people have been putting their emails on the comment section. Just to mention that we didn't send out any WhatsApp group, so please be careful the WhatsApp groups you join. There will be official channels that will send out shortly afterwards where you can, participate in the ESG forum, safe forums that you can engage and meet people and network. But feel free to join, friends on the call, new acquaintances on the call on LinkedIn. And we would also extend other forums to those who are interested. We have the mentorship program, which has been going on for about a year now. And tomorrow, which is the main event, where we would have everybody physically present at the Civic Center. If you've not registered, please do that right away. We would delve deep, with other experts into specific topics. We'll talk about key topics from the perspective of industry leaders, other industry leaders, with respect to this issue of energy security and decarbonization. So please be there, engage, build your network. It's going to be an interesting event, just like we've had two other events starting from 2023. This is a third edition, and it's always jam-packed. And there are lots of success stories. You'll be hearing some of the success stories. Collaborations have come out of those sessions, and people are doing a lot of interesting things. I'm sure you'd build good relationships if you make yourself available at that event tomorrow. So we would just go through because we still have a few minutes left, we'll just go through the comment section and see if there are any interesting thoughts. So it doesn't have to be just questions. If you have comments, you can drop. I can see lots of emails, so please feel free to collaborate and keep in touch. You can also reach the speakers. You can reach myself, Solomon, Mrs. Sarah, Dr. Jeremiah, Mr. Solomon on LinkedIn. And of course, like I said, the ESG forum will be shared shortly, and channels to reach us will be shared shortly, and we'll keep in touch. Okay, I see one comment here. Great presentation. Gas development are at higher cost compared to oil development. How do you advise indigenous companies, oil and gas companies with limited capital base to pursue such investments? Dr. Dari, are you still on the call? Can you respond to that question?
Yeah, hello. So I would have responded better, but I will actually prefer the bankers to prefer, because I've been away from Nigeria for almost 20 years. So I will not be able to answer it, do justice to that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, no problem. I can speak to that.
Yeah.
Gas development is indeed it's capital intensive, so it's capex heavy. However, if you look at the entire value chain, and this is what a lot of companies are doing now, not just restricting themselves to a certain aspect of the value chain, but playing across the value chain, there's significant value. So why stop at the upstream side? Look at how you can invest strategically across the value chain to get the benefits from not just the upstream, the midstream, and the downstream. There's a lot of collaboration required in gas development, because unlike oil that you produce and there's a ready market, for gas, you have to have your gas sales and purchase agreement early on in the development of your gas project, even at the concept phase, right? There has to be line of sight to the customer. It's a function of, not just the upstream oil and gas wells. You also have to have the infrastructure connecting you to the market. And then the market itself has to be ready to take the gas. So a lot of collaboration is required. However, while you spend that heavy capex in quotes upfront, the benefits are more long-term, and the eventual return on investment for each molecule of gas developed is more than oil. Remember, from a molecule of gas, you get your methane, which is that dry gas, which can power gas generators. So over 70% of the power we receive in Nigeria comes from gas to power. That's one. There's also the compressed natural gas piece. There's a lot of, you can see there, a lot of daughter and mother stations being developed across the pipeline, gas pipeline network. Those are entrepreneurial opportunities to take gas to areas that are not able to get gas today. So that's a lot of value there. You have LPG. We just talked extensively about LPG, clean cooking, right? That's something that is a big space, and there's a lot of value in clean cooking, lots of opportunity in the LPG value chain, from depots to retail centers to distribution, and of course, there's the talk around carbon credits, fuel switching from biomass to LPG. So I can go on and on, petrochemicals, so the value chain is rich, right? It requires patient capital, but ultimately the return on investment is higher. And the government also is through several programs like the Midstream Downstream Infrastructure Fund, the Presidential Initiative for CNG. They are actually supporting companies through catalyst funding to develop gas related projects. So those are things that you can look at to de-risk your projects and also to fund those projects as well. So that's one question. I hope I was able to respond to that. Let me see. Okay, we have some hands up. Based on our ground rules, the intent was to get all the comments, all the thoughts on the comment group. So I would, I'm trying not to break the rules. I didn't form the rules. But if you have some key comments, please just put them down, and we would we'll discuss them. We still have a few more minutes left. Okay. So we have a comment on carbon tax, and we have a comment on from Mr. Bello Suleiman. In Nigeria, how do we ensure that GHG data is not manipulated to meet targets or attract funding? And what subsidies are available to support access to clean and affordable energy? That's a loaded question. Mr. Solomon, do you want to touch on that, or any of the speakers? There's some talk around financing, so Mrs. Opeyemi might have some thoughts around that as well. So any thoughts from the speakers?
Okay, I would like to respond to this question.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Solomon. Please get close to your mic.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, fine. So I would like to respond to the question that talked about GHG accounting. GHG accounting can be tamper-proof. It is tamper-proof when DM, that's digital monitoring, reporting, and verification platforms are set up and backed perhaps on a blockchain or with a blockchain layer. This will ensure that the data that is captured, if you use Internet of Things devices, the data that is captured in real time is recorded also in real time, and this data is immutable. So technology provides the opportunity for us to capture data that cannot be tampered with.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Opeyemi, I don't know if you're still on the call. Would you want to talk about financing? So the question was, what subsidies are available to support access to clean and affordable energy? Okay, I think she might have dropped off. Okay, so we talked about green or sustainable linked loans and green bonds. So there is a pool of cash globally, and I say this firsthand because I've seen these pools of cash in some instances, like in places like Canada, you have maybe a group of companies, oil and gas companies, that come together, put down some money for research and development around clean cooking solutions, clean energy solutions. And in a lot of instances, these funds are not fully utilized. So that's in different jurisdictions. From a governmental perspective too, there are lots of grants available globally that are being deployed. I know about a few directed at clean cooking because a major issue in Africa. And there are so many forms of, if you just Google it, you see that there are so many grants out there. So again, even amongst the banks, I'm aware of Stanbic IBTC, they are really focused on sustainable development. So you can connect with Mrs. Okweremi on LinkedIn, reach out to her and ask those specific questions. There are quite a lot of opportunities in that space, and different institutions are promoting that.
Thank you.
Okay, excellent.
Yes, I could not unmute. I needed the organizers to unmute me. Yes, so
Okay,
just
great.
to
Please go ahead.
speak to funding, I'm going to build on what has been said on sustainability reporting, and that's why we're happy about the IFRS financial standards that have come and even created a roadmap for assurance on sustainability reporting. So typically the GHG emissions will be reported in the sustainability report. And once there is a third level opinion or assurance on the reports, then we can be assured that what is being reported has been verified. And that is now what would build on basis for green loans or even sustainability linked loans and the like. So at Stanbic IBTC, we are very big on sustainable finance. We have a full-blown sustainable finance framework that helps us to categorize our financing into green and social loans. So not necessarily only renewables, but even things like access to education, access to health, women-owned businesses and the likes are the things that we look to finance, and we have been growing on our portfolio year on year. So that's a big space for us to play in. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. I can see that there's even someone offering financing on the group for gas projects. So for those who have gas-related projects, please check that out. Mr. Odeni, feel free to connect with him on LinkedIn. But make sure you vet whatever you're doing. Again, we are all here to collaborate. Let's do that responsibly. So again, please drop your comments. If you have thoughts around some of the questions, please feel free to drop your comments. We'll read them out. Okay. Lots of collaboration here on the forum, which is good. Again, just to speak to some of the comments I'm seeing, I know some might be interested in developing competence in some of the areas. Mrs. Sarah spoke about the GRI. I'm actually a GRI certified professional myself. It's not difficult. You just need to go through some of the courses and take the certification examination that would expose you to how to develop your materiality template. How do you determine what's important for your organization? Because each organization, depending on your operations, has what is material in terms of your ESG exposures. And then what can you do to essentially mitigate those ESG or improve on your ESG metrics? So there are lots of certification programs out there. You can take advantage of that. I can see Mr. Sanmi has also put something in the chat box, licensed ESG manager course, advance your career in sustainability. So you can check that out, do your due diligence. And if it's something that works for you, it's good to build on your knowledge base beyond just these type of sessions. The ESG Forum also has a mentorship program where you talk to professionals globally in different parts of the world who are part of the mentor program, mentor-mentee program, who can expose you to what is they're actually doing in hands-on, and they can expose you to different opportunities so you know what's happening across different jurisdictions. And if you're interested in going into that space, they can also guide you. So watch out for that as well. Would be sending that out to folks who are interested. The mentorship program for 2025 is complete. We're going into a new cycle. So you can all be part of it, those who are interested, young professionals. Okay, so yes, we'll share the ESG programs we have. Next year, we plan to have a physical class. It's going to be a full day class, and we'll have different speakers, facilitators across different industries come together to take on different topics. So watch out for that as well. That will be announced at some point early 2026. So you can all prep yourselves for that. And I always prefer those physical events because you can meet face to face and have those interesting and important conversations. Okay. Okay, so I have a question from Ifeoma. And it says, I have the following questions based on the just concluded short courses with University of Cambridge and its affiliates. Do we have enabling laws and policies as each country has its peculiarities? Do we have a process of educating all stakeholders involved in Nigeria to meet global best practice? Singapore is a good example where the stakeholders involved in these policies and laws. Certifications without enabling environment reduces outcomes. Okay, so any thoughts from the moderators, the facilitators for the different sessions on enabling laws? Let's start with that, and policies. I know Sarah spoke to that. I don't know if Sarah, you're still on the call. Okay, I think Sarah might have dropped off. So yeah, in terms of requirements, I think she spoke to the fact that sustainability disclosures are going to be mandatory very soon. In fact, companies that are listed with the Nigerian Stock Exchange must report using IFRS S1 and S2. Okay, great. We have the SME.
Okay.
Go ahead, please.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute initially, but I was
Okay.
asked to unmute. So yes, we have some laws. Where Nigeria normally fails is in implementation. So we're looking at the responsible agencies and hoping that we will not fail in the point of implementation again in ESG. But Nigeria has some laws. We have the Climate Act, the Climate Change Act. I think that went out in 2020 or 2021. And it was our very first comprehensive climate law, which requires governments and private entities to develop and implement low carbon policies for their organization. You understand? And then it looked at organizations bringing out 5-year carbon climate-related budgets for industries that have a climate impact. So that law is there. Nigeria has also adopted the IFRS as our reporting standard, and it's going to be mandatory for even SMEs from 2030. That tells us that, you know, ESG reporting is no longer a nice to have. It is now a mandatory requirement from government, a regulatory requirement, and it gives us, you know, a lot of opportunities, even as organizations in that area. I know that there are many other acts, but another one I can talk about, the Harmful Waste Act, which you can't just, you know, throw your, you know, dispose of your harmful waste anyhow. You need to follow a process, you need to clean up, you need to ensure that by the time you dispose of your waste, it's no longer harmful to human life or to our or to the water bodies, you know. So those are acts that are ESG related that different companies have come up with. And if you work in big industries today, you find out that many people now have, you know, governance structures. We now have governance structures that affect the human part of things. So all of those things are there. If you look at the Nigerian context, it's actually ESG related because it's talking about the impact of the oil and gas sector on the communities where we operate. So it operates in the social aspect. So there are a lot of laws if you look at ESG from that angle. But where I'll talk about is that we really need to be clear on implementation and ensure that, you know, we are putting forward in terms of the carrot and the stick. What is the impact? If somebody does not do this, you know, what does it mean? How do we ensure that people are actually accountable and responsible for their actions in the ESG space? Because if we get implementation right, I tell you, we are on a highway to being the ESG capital. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Excellent points. In the oil and gas space as well, the regulator, NUPRC, has also reeled out mandatory greenhouse gas reporting, right? So for oil and gas companies to report frequently their emission profile and their also their decarbonization pathways as well. So everything is speaking together. By the time, you know, of course, like Sarah said, 2030 becomes fully mandatory. You know, it's no longer a nice to have. So it's barely 4 years away. And also with the NDCs, of course, the National Council on Climate Change, you know, pushing forward with that actively, and also the plan to operationalize the carbon market. All those things would bring down requirements, compliance requirements across board. So it's here, it's coming. We need to just prep ourselves, ensure that we remain aware. And I saw a comment around that. How do you educate stakeholders? It's through forums like this. And we are all champions on this call. So talking about it within our organizations is important. And that's what Sarah also alluded to. The journey has to start from somewhere. Start today and push the envelope within your area of influence. Okay. There's a question. I would like to make a comment on sustainability reporting. Please go ahead and make your comment in the comment section. I would read it out. We have about 6 minutes left. So if there are any comments or thoughts, please put them in the comment section and I'll read them out. Okay. So Mr. Oji from Bank of Industry, beautiful, extending fellowship to all of us and those interested with respect to their sustainability finance group. So please feel free to reach out to him as well. So like we said, this is a great opportunity to collaborate. Please keep putting your comments. Let's read them out. Let's talk about them. If there are any opportunities for collaboration, please feel free, mention that as well. Ibidum talks about the IFRS Foundation website. That is also a very good forum to develop competence. There are some free courses and there are also paid courses as you move towards certification. So please start with the free courses, go on there and learn more about S1 and S2. Like Sarah said, a lot of the frameworks are collapsing into the IFRS S1 and S2. So like the TFND and TFCD are all collapsing. TFND has already collapsed into IFRS, but we also have the TFCD collapsing into it as well. So it's becoming streamlined. We initially had the alphabet soup, so many frameworks, but things are sort of converging. So please feel free to go to the foundation site. Thanks for that. Best way to connect, please feel free to connect with all of us on LinkedIn. And the ESG forum as well will share emails with future programs. And like I mentioned, there's a young professional forum. There are also networking events for all of us, both young and old and senior professional. I see myself as a young professional because I'm always learning something new. So we would have those forums clearly stated. Again, apologies that we're not opening up the mics. It's based on the guidelines we've been given so that we can moderate and filter out the comments. So, but please feel free to state your comments or outline your comments out here. Okay. Jerry is asking a question. Does Carbonex have the clean cooking stoves on sale already? Mr. Solomon, can you speak to that? Please come close to your mic so we can hear you.
Hello.
Please go ahead, Mr. Solomon.
Yes, Jerry, we have the clean cooking stoves, but they are not for sale to individuals. However, if cooperatives or larger institutions want them, we can deploy on their behalf. The stoves are not for sale to individuals.
Okay, thank you. Okay, there's a question: with the Dangote refinery now in operation, would you advise anyone to invest in or acquire a tank farm? Okay, so that's a bit out of scope for this discussion. But I mean, just a general statement, ultimately we require both public and private sector to invest in development of gas infrastructure. So if there are opportunities to play in that space, that helps us to build on the energy security story and achieve our objectives. So anything related to gas development is welcome. Okay. So Mr. John says, I want to add to what the last speaker said. What is lacking is contracting the right persons for the job. Okay. So I think that speaks to governance, essentially. And that's part of the ESG pillar, ensuring that you have the right governance in place. All that is, embedded in the ESG framework when deploying your sustainability programs. You look across board, like Sarah has mentioned, including your governance structure, who is taking charge in implementing your strategies. Okay. Great. So there are lots of opportunities for further learning. Like I mentioned, we'll be rolling out our programs for next year, and feel free to reach out to any of the facilitators, the moderators on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for joining the program for today, the Masterclass for 2025. We're looking forward to seeing you tomorrow at the main event at the Civic Center. If you've not registered, please go ahead, register, and we'll see you live and direct. Enjoy the rest of your day, and it's bye for now.